Right. Right, there we go. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a couple of new faces, and some recycled faces. Made a reappearance. So for the benefit of anybody who's watching online, I'm Stephen Robinson. I'm the leader of Chelmsford City Council, and as the leader, I chair the Cabinet meetings. So welcome to the first meeting of the Cabinet since the election. I do my best to be open and transparent and fair and give everybody a reasonable say, but you don't go on forever. And again, just so that people know, if they're not clear, the voting members of Cabinet are just the members of the Cabinet, and under the Local Government Act 2000, it's not a pro rata committee meeting, but obviously the opposition groups nominate spokespeople to shadow the Cabinet portfolios. We had a bit of a Cabinet shuffle after the election, which was announced at Council. Anyway, that's by way of a preamble. Good evening. We don't have any members of the public, so you, as councillors and officers, you all know the evacuation arrangements if there was to be a fire which is to leave and assemble by the War Memorial. And the meeting is being filmed, and please put your mobile phones on silent. Thank you. Right, so moving on, agenda item 1, apologies. I don't think
Yeah, I've got apologies from Councillor Reilly and Councillor Simon Goldman.
Right, thank you. Okay, and moving swiftly on, item 2, any declarations of interest items on the agenda? No? Okay. Moving on, item 3, can I sign the minutes of the 14th of March as a correct record? Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. We don't have any public questions, so no item 4. Item 5, do we have questions from members of the Council for items for which the Cabinet is responsible? Councillor Steele, anybody else? No? Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to talk about the National Grid consultation and ask about that. As I'm sure you know, they're undertaking a second non-statutory public consultation on the proposal for the new high-voltage power line, and now calling it Norwich to Tilbury rather than the Green proposal. The public consultation starts 27th of June and runs until 21st of August. On the last consultation, City Council missed the deadline, although they asked for an extension and then met that deadline. On the County Council and Parish Councils managed to meet the deadline. I just think it doesn't look particularly good if we, the City Council, don't meet a deadline when other organisations, other local authorities are meeting it. And I wonder if it's possible to actually do the response this time, what process we employ, or you employ, to do the response this time by the actual 21st of August deadline. I understand the process includes policy board and so on and so forth, but is there any way of shortcutting that with extraordinary meetings or whatever, or delegated responsibility? Because I think it looks better from our point of view if we're meeting the deadline. It looks a little bit like we're not too bothered if we ask for an extension. So my request really is, can we please try and meet the deadline? Is that possible? Okay.
Well, as you hinted at in your answer, or your question rather, my answer to that is that we wanted to ensure last time that all members had the opportunity to express their views, which if we'd done it under delegated authority to the Chief Executive wouldn't have happened. So we took it to Policy Board, which gave all members the opportunity to contribute. We submitted a very robust statement of opposition in line with many other councils and organisations, and I'm sure we will do the same this time. The proposals haven't changed dramatically. We just see a bit more of the detail of where they're actually proposed to go. It remains a massive blot on the landscape, and they don't seem to have changed very much in listening or not listening to the first round of consultation. And so I'm sure we will do our best to make sure that happens within the timescale. Okay. Nobody else. Right. So the next item, item 6, is from the Cabinet Member for Greener and Safer Chelmsford about Highlands Park Public Spaces Protection Order. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. So we are here tonight to consider going out to consultation regarding a proposed Public Spaces Protection Order, or PSPO. This deals with restricting areas of Highlands Park where dogs are allowed off the lead, and also restricting the number of dogs that can be walked by an individual. And the purpose of public space protection orders is to address antisocial behaviour. Sadly, we have seen an increase locally and indeed nationally in the number of dog-on-dog and dog-on-human attacks. And in Chelmsford, in the last year alone, 33 attacks were officially reported, and that doesn't include attacks by stray dogs. The whole purpose of a public space protection order is to look after the safety of the public and to respect the many different park users that visit and enjoy Highlands each day. The Cabinet report that you have on the website that's accessible also to the public, it outlines the PSPO itself as well, and I will be pleased to take questions on that document this evening. Very kindly, Lewis Mould from Public Health and Protection Services is here to answer any questions, and additionally, the Director of Public Places, Keith Nicholson, is behind me, should you have any questions on the PSPO itself. I have been contacted by a number of people, and I have reassured them that this is the first part of the process, and I would ask that all members encourage anyone who does contact them to please put their comments forward, however they feel about the potential introduction of this order. It's a vital part of the consultation, and we need to take into account the views of the public. If Cabinet were to approve going out to public consultation this evening, any representations made during the consultation period, which would run from the 13th of July, would be considered at a future Cabinet meeting, and only then will a decision be taken on whether to make the order as proposed or not. So I'll just quickly run through the options. We have the options this evening, members, to consult on the making of the Public Spaces Protection Order, to consult on the making of the Public Spaces Protection Order with amendments, or not to proceed with the making of the Public Spaces Protection Order. And the recommendations are that the Director of Public Places be authorised to consult on the proposed Public Spaces Protection Order, and if following the consultation no objections are received, then the Director of Public Places would be authorised, in consultation with myself as Cabinet Member for Greener and Safer Chelmsford, to make the Public Spaces Protection Order. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair Leader. Yeah, I think from our side we can be broadly supportive of this PSPO. It is exactly what a PSPO is there for. I was looking into the legislation earlier, and of course, times have changed in the last 10 years since PSPOs were put into place. The contingency for dogs was included within that infrastructure within the legislation. So, as far as the legislation is concerned, it is the right tool to use. That said, we do recognise it is just a consultation at this stage, and we will be encouraging people to respond to that consultation. Because I do have some reservations, particularly around the dog walkers, professional dog walkers. I think it's quite an arbitrary figure to say 4 dogs. 4 Alsatians are very different to 4 Dachshunds. I think we need to be a bit more pragmatic on that. And the other big issue, I think, for us is who's going to enforce it. A PSPO needs to be enforced. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Wilson. Indeed, you mentioned dog walkers, and the number of no more than 4 dogs on a lead at any one time is, I understand, the recommendation of the RSPCA. Indeed, as you rightly say, there is a difference in size, but not necessarily in behaviour between larger dogs and smaller dogs. Dogs can be unpredictable, and we have had a number of occasions where dog fouling has unhappily occurred when dogs that have gone out with a professional walker have been running free. So there are associated issues of antisocial behaviour. And the second part of your question, forgive me, you mentioned the enforcement aspects. Now, I know that communication is absolutely key with this, and we will be issuing advice initially with officers. I believe public health protection officers will be patrolling, and people will be reminded of their obligations should the PSPO be enforced. There'll also be literature circulated and available within Highlands, and we'll be sure to run a communication campaign about this. But enforcement will take place, undoubtedly, should the PSPO be agreed. It's a large space. We expect all people in Highlands, especially if they're in control of an animal, to be responsible, and we would encourage them to always be that, whether there's a PSPO or not. But I do appreciate your concerns over enforcement, and I'm sure officers will provide us with further detail should the PSPO then come to Cabinet later in the year.
I'm happy to take Councillor Thorpe, although we usually only take one spokesperson from each group on each item.
You humour me. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. It is in my ward, so I did want to ask a quick question on it, if I may. It did strike me that the paper didn't have much in the way of data in terms of the number of attacks. So it talks about 33 attacks last year, but it doesn't actually provide a breakdown of where those attacks took place. I think that refers to the whole of Chelmsford, not just Highlands. So could we possibly have a breakdown in terms of all of Chelmsford parks and where the attacks are? And it also mentions an increase in the number of attacks, but again, there's no data to say that. So what were the numbers of attacks in previous years? Also, it referred to the PSPO potentially being extended or varied, and I just wondered what the safeguards were on that, because obviously if it continues to be extended or varied, then that could pose problems for dog walkers. So yeah, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. One attack is too many. However that occurs, whether it's a dog on human, or unfortunately dog on other wildlife. And I can tell you now that we've had at least 2 maulings of deer in Highlands Park, which have resulted in terrible injuries and having to euthanise those creatures. And as regards data, I'm sure we can gather that for you. It may indicate areas where there may be proposals on the same lines. I believe Galleywood Common, we've seen quite a lot of issues, whether they've resulted in attacks or not, but it's also the threatening behaviour or the fact that people feel uncomfortable around dogs being off-lead, especially in the areas that we've outlined on this plan. It brings a sense of safety to people. It shouldn't have to result in a dog attacking another dog or a human or a wild animal before we take action, and the Public Space Protection Order is there to provide balance so all park users can feel safe whether or not they are with a dog on or off leads.
No other questions? Oh, Councillor Raven. Again, it's now the 3rd member of the Conservative group, so if you could keep your question very short.
It is very short. Would you look to be rolling this out to other parks or just Highlands?
Public space protection orders can be applied in any public space, so I can't say at this time that we would consider instituting it anywhere else. The fact is, in Highlands, we have the opportunity to provide areas of increased reassurance to people. So PSPOs can be, as I say, they can be varied as well, and I think that one of the questions considered that. So PSPOs last for 3 years. They can be extended beyond that at any time within that 3 years. They can be varied, and of course the proper procedures would be followed if we do consider introducing a PSPO in any other parks in the district. Thank you.
Okay, nothing else. So is that recommendation option that we consult approved?
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, so we're moving on to section 7, which has got a number of financial items. So we have 7.1 on Treasury Management, 7.2, which is the outturn, 7.2, which is the capital programme outturn, 7.3 is looking forward to the budget framework. So particularly for the benefit of newer members, I'll say a couple of words of explanation. 7.1 is the first of 2 reports that look back at things that have happened for the year ended 31st of March. First one is the report to council, which will go on to council on Treasury Management, and it comes to us here July every year. Treasury Management, previous members will know, is about how we manage our cash and our financial investments. Sometimes in these reports the word borrowing gets used, but this council doesn't borrow in the way that most people would understand it, e.g. from banks or the markets. We do, though, borrow internally, and that's part of the process. So obviously Treasury Management is just one aspect of how we ensure sound financial management at the council. The council always manage its finances properly, and this is part of the council's robust processes where activity is monitored. It's gone to the Treasury Management and Investment Subcommittee and now comes to Cabinet and will go to council. All the transactions that are mentioned in the report over the last 12 months were within the terms of the strategy which council previously approved. In November, we will formally review the strategy here at Cabinet and then at full council in December. So this is a looking back report. No changes are proposed at this stage. So the paper itself is summarised on page 3 and then goes on as a 12-page report in total. As I say, the summary is on page 3. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay. My report agreed. Thank you. Right. Moving on. So 7.2, similarly, this is looking back to the year recently ended on the 31st of March. The capital programme update. And again, for the benefit of new members, there is a huge difference between capital spending on assets like land, improving existing buildings, replacing vehicles and so on, and revenue spending. All councils are very short of revenue, but capital spending is dealt with and managed separately and a separate process. So this is the capital programme update and outturn for the year recently ended. There's a lot of detail across those 27 pages, especially in the appendices, but it's worth perhaps highlighting what this is to try and make it real. It's not just about numbers, it's about making a difference to our city. It's about improving sports and leisure facilities at the Chelmsford Athletic Centre, Bewley Park, Oaklands Park and Southwood and Ferrers. Improvements at Highlands House, modernising the theatre to attract new audiences and visitors, supporting businesses with new workshops that generate income to the council, improving the high street, continuing to plant 17,000 trees as part of action on the climate and ecological emergency, and last but absolutely not least, substantial investment to offer homes to all rough sleepers and to buy or build new homes for some of the over 400 homeless households that we have, so that we can reduce the amount of money that we pay to private sector landlords. That's puts a bit of flesh on the bone of what can otherwise sound a relatively dry report, which is full of lots of numbers. That's what the capital programme is about. It's about making our city greener, fairer and better connected. So do I have any questions on last year's capital programme?
Well,
Councillor Whitehead.
Councillor Sun and I are going to share that because of your shared responsibilities as well, as you understand it really. Now, Waterside is going to come separately to us, isn't it? And therefore, I'm not going to ask lots of questions on Waterside because I'm conscious that there'll be a report. There are a couple of things that I wasn't entirely sure from it. In one bit, it says we've got 13 million pounds grant money. Is that still here, or has it already been spent on Waterside? Was one of my questions. I mean, we're getting grant monies in all sorts of ways, and therefore, as again, I don't want to sort of preempt what's going to be a much more complicated and detailed response, really, but that was one of the things that was mentioned in there. It says it's been drawn down, I think it's fair to say. So do we have the money here, or has it been spent?
That grant was for that purpose, for the Waterside, for the gas pressure reduction system, the gas main and the bridge was what the 13 million is for, and those are different contracts. So we have to draw down different parts of the 13 million as we pay the bills on those. So the gas main and moving the gas pressure reduction system is happened, almost happened. But we still have, obviously, to build the bridge.
Yeah, quite.
Which is what, as you say, that's the item that's coming to council.
I won't go into
I'm
all
going
that
to
now.
ask Mr. Reeves if I've missed anything else.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the 13 million has been spent. We've managed to claim it in advance, which helps the cash flow of the authority. Obviously, there is a clawback arrangement, which will be part of the report that's made to July Council, and that will be explained in there.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I know there's still negotiations continuing. It says on the bridge and so on particularly. Will they be concluded by the time of the full council meeting?
Well, yes, I think is the short answer. The report to council is about whether we actually commit to the, as you mentioned, it's summarised in here that it's in two stages. There was the design stage and then there's the construction stage. And as you know, or as we all know, every single construction contract in the country has been subject to massive inflation in recent months, and that's the main problem that we're facing. Like every other authority and every other business and individual in the country is being affected by those inflationary costs. And but as you say, that's really going to be dealt with in our discussion at council. Okay. Councillor Sullivan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I've got a composite question really on capital projects. I can take it in 3 chunks if that's easier for you. So, okay. The first one then is the report states that in connection with the Bewley Railway Station and the North East Bypass, both projects are on schedule and on budget. A report in the press last week says that the CELEP has warned of a significant budget gap which puts the North East Bypass at risk, with a knock-on effect on the railway station. Could you please advise members of the current situation and confirm that both projects will not be delayed or cancelled? Part one. Do you want the other 2, or do you do that first?
Do them all.
Do them all, right, okay. There are many capital projects which have no funding shown and which will have to be funded by borrowing, thereby increasing revenue costs. Are you able to share with us the plans for revenue cost savings which will be necessary with additional costs are to be funded? One. And the last one is tucked away in the report under mass tree planting. It states planting of trees should not have been a capital project but a revenue cost, which seems totally logical to me. The project has been deferred till 29/30. I'm assuming that's correct, in which case what will the effect be on the council's green agenda?
The North East Bypass and the station is a county council project, but it's just we and the county have worked together to get the HIF bid, which we got. The announcement was back in August 2019, and the City Council were recently advised, as I was saying on the previous item, about construction cost overruns for the bids which had come in, and therefore the county council. So really, as it happens with my other hat on, I can have a bit more information. But it's a county council responsibility. The county council is responsible for delivering the North East Bypass, and they are in negotiation with Homes England. In fact, I've just come back from the LGA conference, and I spoke to someone at Homes England there, and Homes England are keen to continue to work with authorities that have got programmes which are fairly well advanced, and have got the political commitment to deliver them. So that applies to some of the things in our programme here, and hopefully the North East Bypass. I hope that the County Council's negotiations with Homes England will be successful, but I'm not in control of that. As I said when I am presenting the report, this is an outturn on last year's report. This isn't about how we fund the capital programme going forwards. So you can ask your second question when that's at the appropriate time, which will be probably at October Cabinet or even January. And on trees, I'm not sure the detail, and I don't know if Mr. Reeves has got an answer for me.
The trees. When the project was started, we always were aware that some of the costs could be revenue, but some of it does qualify for capital, in fact, usually the vast majority. So what we do every year is, because we don't know exactly what's going to be capital and what's going to be revenue, at the end of the year we move any costs that do not qualify as capital back into revenue. Within the reserves there's money set aside to fund that, so effectively it's exactly the same as funding it from capital. There's one-off money set aside to deal with it.
Short answer, we're going to carry on planting 17,000 trees until the end of the decade, as long as we're still in charge. Any other questions? No? Okay, so that's 7.2. Is that agreed? Right, 7.3. So, I've already said on both of these items that the world's gone mad in the last year or so in terms of inflation. That is the short version of what this report is about. We normally have a medium-term financial strategy full report to July Cabinet and then Council. But this year, due to the uncertainties and therefore the inability to project too far ahead, we are splitting it into two documents. So this document is a relatively short, broad framework document which contains recommendations on the starting the process to create the 2024-2025 budget, which will of course be a balanced budget which we will have to set in February next year, and the more thorough and forward-looking document will come in the autumn to Cabinet, which will look at the forecast for the revenue and capital budgets. And as we've said before, and we know there is a revenue budget shortfall. Every council is facing similar challenges, but there are some items which are mentioned in the report which aren't. Everything isn't bad news. We've finally seen a slight reduction in energy costs, for example, and that's mentioned in the report. It's a 17-page report, but as I said, the short version is we are having to deal with inflation, the like of which we haven't seen for decades. It's out of the council's control. It was chaos caused in Downing Street, and it continues to cause not just huge problems here and now, but an uncertain future, which is why we split it into two parts. The big issues for this council, indeed any council, are the staff pay bill, energy costs and construction costs that we've just alluded to, and these affect everybody. So at this time of uncertainty, we've split the report into two sections, and we wait to the autumn before going into greater detail. This report identifies the next steps for creating a framework for next year's budget. Any questions?
Wait results.
Yeah, if you could get your crystal ball out. You know, okay, is that report agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Right, now the moment you've all been waiting for, proposed amendments to the Constitution. So this has been discussed by at the working group with input from Councillor Whitehead and colleagues, and then went to the Governance Committee. And there's four relatively minor changes that are proposed to the Constitution: attendance at working groups, the sealing of documents no longer needing to be witnessed by the Mayor, adding the Rural Prosperity Fund to the list of the financial list, and delegating the adoption of neighbourhood plans to the officers so that we don't get caught by not having meetings scheduled. So those are four relatively minor items. I think Councillor Whitehead was happy with all of them. Indeed. Any other questions? No? Okay, is that report agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay. So, item 8, we don't have any urgent items, no? Remind us which reports are going to Council.
All of the item 7 ones.
All of item 7, there we go. So we can do this all over again. in 3 weeks' time. Right, so I now need to move the exclusion of the press and public under Section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972 on the grounds that we'll be considering exempt information within paragraph 3 of Schedule 12A to the Act. Have we switched it off?